morning's plenary speaker is our own, very own National Space Society President, Mr. Charlie Walker. Most of you probably know Charlie pretty well, either personally from meeting him at these ISDCs every year, or from his column, which has appeared for many years at Astra. But I don't think it hurts to go over the accomplishments of our NSS president, so have a little understanding of how lucky, how fortunate we are to have this individual representing the society. Mr. Walker was the first non-career commercially sponsored astronaut, serving as a payload specialist on 3 space shuttle missions during 1984 and 1985. On these flights, he operated equipment designed by McDonnell Douglas Astronautics Company for his electrophoresis biotechnology commercialization program. He accumulated 20 days and 8.2 million miles of spaceflight experience. Not too many nonprofit organizations that have a president that can claim that kind of a background. He is presently Senior Specialist for Advanced Space Program Development at McDonnell Douglas and Defense Space and Defense Systems. He's currently working in Washington, D.C., where he's involved in programs as diverse as International Space Station, reusable launch vehicles, and closed environmental life support systems. So basically, Charlie, it sounds like you're working on everything we need in order to get us on the space frontier. If we just let them give you like about $4 or $5 billion, you can handle it on your own. Charlie has contributed to U.S. space policy, science, and technology program reviews. He has authored numerous papers, columns, and articles on space applications, commercialization, space history, and public advocacy of space activity. He has served on several university research centers, panels, and he's currently an advisor to the Challenger Center for Space Science Education and the Association of Space Explorers. Now I'd like to help me welcome Mr. Charles Walker, who's going to talk to us today. Direction or same old stuff.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm very proud to be here today, and I want to, first of all, thank Michael and his very capable and I'm sure nearly exhausted team who have put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to make this conference a success that I really feel like it has been. You saw me move down the microphone here. I'm proud that we've got one very active member and a chapter leader who's a lot closer to space than lots of us already are. New directions or same old stuff. The National Space Society bylaws require an annual report to the membership by the president of the organization. We haven't always done that. Don't report us to the IRS, please. We can't stand that. But this year I wanted to with a point of focus, to do that for you, the attendees of this ISDC, and for the membership as a whole. There will be not exactly these words that I'll be uttering this morning, but a digest of these appearing in the next issue of Ad Astra for the entire membership. But I want to present to you not only facts. This is not going to, I hope it's not going to be a dry report anyway. I don't intend for it to be. It will be just facts. There will be some opinion. And if we're really lucky, I might not get too far into prediction. I'm a little leery of prediction. I like to learn from our forebears, and in this vein, I feel like I want to learn from Wilbur Wright. 96 years ago, that's in fact 1 year before the Wright brothers had their day at Kitty Hawk, Wilbur Wright said, quote, "Man will not fly for 50 years," end quote. Within 2 months of their flight at Kitty Hawk, Wilbur Wright is reported as having confessed to a public group, "I confess that in 1901 I did say to my brother Orville that man would not fly for 50 years. This is a demonstration of my impotence as a prophet, and it has given me a shock such that ever since I have avoided all prediction. Well, I tend to think that's probably a pretty good rule to follow, at least not prediction with such vehemence or certainty. Certainly when it comes to arenas and challenges that address not only the technical capabilities of the day, our human technical abilities of the day, but also challenges that address the human spirit. One should not predict the limits to which the human spirit can take us. The National Space Society is the oldest active public space advocacy organization in the United States. Michael, if I could have the next chart up. I want to display for you something which many of you, I believe, already know. It's the vision of your National Space Society, people living and working in thriving communities beyond the Earth. And the mission of the organization, subset or more focus on that vision. And that mission says to promote change in social, technical, economic, and political conditions to advance the day when people will live and work in space. This is what we are after as an organization. And all of you who are members, and I hope all of you are members, are certainly focused by your membership and your support, are helping us focus activities in this direction. Now, I've got to say that the day-to-day tussles in the Washington, D.C. area, where I have both the good and bad fortune to live and work, depending upon the day. The tussles of congressional, White House, NASA, and media pressures give and take sometimes blur my view of where we in fact are in reaching for and achieving this mission and ultimately the vision. But at our International Space Development Conferences, at this ISDC, and at our regional conferences, which I often attend, I get my vision back. We as an organization are making progress. Now let me give you a little bit of perspective, since that is a very general statement and probably in many minds arguable. But let me give you some perspective. I've pulled out some references which I have managed to save over many years. And I look back 20 years to a day when, in fact, the National Space Society was not one organization, but was two. The National Space Institute and the L5 Society. Now, the L5 Society, the activists were, at that time, mostly active in what the L5 Society termed as their vision, which was, quote, they saw themselves as the international organization working to make space settlement a reality by 1990, end quote. We missed that one. Somebody hasn't heard of Wilbur Wright's declaration that one should not be a prophet too boldly, anyway, I guess. Actually, those of us, and I think there are lots of us in this room that were a part of that time in this way, and were members of the L5 Society, and by gosh, we did want to believe that. Now, the L5 Society at that point in time had around 1,000 members, and in 1977, the administrative office in Tucson reported a 15% annual growth in membership. Now, that's pretty good. But that time was different than this time. In those few years past, the and the prospect of large numbers of in the vastness of space, as inspired by the work of Dr. Jerry O'Neill, and spurred by international cries for low-cost, limitless energy. We had, at that time, fairly rampant, at least among the youth, I think, fear of environmental degradation. And we were also concerned about the limits of growth. Limits of growth being a term of results from academic models that showed a very dire outcome of the exponential growth of industrial patterns. Well, all of that as a background, I think very clearly and forcibly set the stage for the kind of inspired view and direction that many of us set ourselves on at that point in time. Space was seen as a limitless resource. Now remember, the space shuttle had not flown yet. Space was seen as a more perfect home. It was seen as a new start. A new start in many ways. I mentioned Jerry O'Neill as being one of the, in fact, the driving founder in thought of the direction, space settlements. But there's one other individual that was also very vocal in and around 1977 on the subject of human migration into space, and that was Dr. Tim Leary. Both of these individuals obtained some national recognition, mostly for pretty diverse and different activities. The L5 Society, in fact, in 1977 was considering changing its name to the Space Colony Society. This was a little bit different day than today. In the organization's publications, the L5 News and its sister publication, Space Settlement, there were articles with a focus on human migration into space as an inevitable human evolutionary imperative. But there were technical issues talked about as well, mostly about life support systems, closed environmental systems for these very large space colonies. And there was much discussion of the social consequences of extraterrestrial colonization. From what I remember and from what I've seen in a quick review of those publications in my files, those discussions of social consequences were really all about the social infrastructure and interactions on the space colonies, not about the social consequences of some of us starting to live out there and the wheelings and dealings of those who were left behind. It really was a time in which we were extending our minds, and we hoped our bodies would soon follow into space. We thought that the space shuttle would bring us really cheap, routine was the word, access to space. The space shuttle was seen as the premier vehicle, saving us from all of the fears mentioned above. The space shuttle was expected and presumed to be our vehicle to the stars. Well, we all have some sense of where that prediction, that expectation landed. And quite frankly, I think that over the first many years of space shuttle R&D flights, and then what was initially anyway called operational flights, and certainly into the early 1986 with the Challenger accident. At that point in time, there became a sincere and serious change of mindset about just how easy access was. And I think many of us in this movement, as we sometimes call it, many of us who had set our eyes and careers and our personal lives even on a direction that way, felt a little abused, and in fact some people have used the term lied to, by a government who thought it was doing the best thing, that thought it was building a transportation system, but it was a bureaucracy that was doing what bureaucracies do. Well, that was a perspective from 20 years ago, but before I leave 20 years ago, let me read to you a headline from the Wall Street Journal in early 1977. The title goes as follows: "Apathy is NASA's biggest foe." The article then goes on to start with an opening sentence: "NASA itself has failed to advance its own causes effectively." Some things don't seem to change. But to its credit, in fact, to its credit, in the year 1977, NASA at its Ames Research Center sponsored what was titled the Summer Study in Space Settlements and Industrialization Using Non-Terrestrial Materials. Even that bureaucracy that was still at that point in time planning great things for transportation, easy transportation, and all that could follow from the low Earth orbit, did have its mind on a migration of sorts out into space. Well, that was 20 years ago. Let's move forward 10 years. Now, 1987, just 10 years ago, the L5 Society and the National Space Institute, then called the National Space Society, merged and kept the name National Space Society. The two organizations had, and upon merger, some 15,000 members. Space colonies, islands in space for humankind had faded as a clear and stated achievable goal. The strategic planning that I saw and see in the paperwork from that time was upon setting goals around lunar and Martian exploration and development, with a long-range strategic goal of settlement. The shuttle had become a tragedy and a disappointment. After 26 launches into early 1986, it was not flying at this point in time, 1987, and it would not be for another year again. I think there was some strong disappointment and some disillusionment among the space movement at the time. In fact, at that point in time, there was a lot of active discussion among members of this organization, discussion of next generation Earth-to-orbit launch systems. Ideas and studies abounded, from the American rocket company's industrial launch vehicle, remember that, to the National Aerospace Plane, remember that. Now let's quickly bring ourselves forward to today. Today, 1997. Well, what's happened in the last year or so? Well, I want to bring it right out to the top. ALH 84001. At the time, it made all of the news headlines. It made magazine covers in August, and of course we were all talking about it. The scientific community, of course, took a much cooler view of it overall. It was one piece of evidence, and that piece of evidence was in dispute. And I think that many of us in this room, maybe even approaching all of us, have a very strong emotional desire to believe that, yes, those nano-sized deposits and so-called fossils are in fact fossils of some ancient living life form. We want to believe that, and we hope in fact that is the case. I certainly do. But even if it turns out that that particular piece of rock and those particular formations were not at some point in time. What has happened since that public announcement in August of 1996 is that the consciousness of the public and even our decision makers, remember how quickly the President of the United States ran out onto the White House lawn and in front of the ever-waiting microphones and said that he saw this as an amazing revelation and discovery. And while it was still debatable that he was going to support this nation's pursuit of the exploration of Mars to determine the truth of this, and then he got on a helicopter and probably forgot about it. But the point is that in this day and age, when issues come and go, certainly on the political, on the executive level of our government, issues come and go at lightning fast speed. Just to get on the president's lips is significant because it sets people's minds in motion. It leaves residual hopes and expectations, and those are what we, the believers, can and do build on. Now, what else has happened? Well, let's see. Following upon that discovery and that announcement, and as you'll remember, in fact, there was another announcement regarding a British team's analysis of a separate meteorite identified as Martian in origin a couple of months later that said that they had basically seen this and found the same thing. So there was, in fact, beginning a flow of evidence. Well, this organization, the National Space Society's board, met in September. And at that meeting, the board decided that Mars was so significant in the public's mind at the moment, as well as potentially a very interesting target for new, clear, we expected and hoped, clear reasons. And so it determined that your organization should become much more visible and put much more focus on Mars, the exploration and development of Mars as a focus for human exploration. But the moon has not been forgotten. In 1996, the National Space Society started a focused campaign titled Return to the Moon. Now, it so happens that this campaign started before another public announcement. A public announcement by scientists and researchers who had spent a lot of time before coming out of the closet looking at Clementine data. From that that moon orbiter, they scanned, analyzed, digested, debated, and then finally came out with a paper that said that, yes, almost certainly there is water at the south pole of the moon. Of course, the press immediately said, well, how deep is this lake? We're water creatures. I mean, if it's not cooled, then water is just it's very very ever present. Well, it's probably not that way in this deposit that is apparently in an ever dark, deep crater at the south pole, at least one crater at the south pole of the moon. It's probably diversified. It's scattered and embedded within the regolith and the soil. But for a moon that is drier than the inside of a Sahara rattlesnake's mouth, it is very intriguing and very hopeful. And then what about Europa? Galileo, long in being launched and even longer in arriving at Jupiter, has returned some fantastic visual and other evidence, including what we, I'm sure, would like to think of as a revelation that, no, not really a revelation. In fact, it's a confirmation that Arthur C. Clarke was right. And I might have to take back my whole statement about prophecy. I mean, there's a guy that really kind of gets it right a lot of the time, doesn't he? A confirmation that there is probably liquid water beneath the capping ice of the Jupiter, the Jovian moon Europa. And it seems to be warm enough inside that that it may in fact be a home for life of some kind. Well, with all of that, this organization has a number of initiatives underway. Again, we launched the Return to the Moon campaign in 1996, and then we added Mars to that campaign as the greater objective. Now, of course, during 1996, we continued as an organization to strongly, not only in the public arena, but with focus in Washington, D.C., to support the reusable launch vehicle program, development of technology with the near-term objective of really economical access to space via reusable technology. The X-33 program, the X-34 technology program. We also supported very strongly the Lunar Prospector and look forward to the launch of Lunar Prospector, yes, even this year. And we support the International Space Station. We have long supported the International Space Station, with some debate in the earlier years, but I think with general consensus at least that this program must go forward, and that as an objective of the program, the study of human endurance, human adaptability to low-gravity environments is absolutely necessary for us to take the next steps. The next steps to a 1/6 gravity environment on the Moon, to a 1/3 gravity environment on the surface of Mars, and all of the very low-gravity environments in between. That is necessary if we're going to ever seriously plan on you, me, our children, our grandchildren living and working in those environments. So the space station has a definitive need, among many others, in my opinion. Testimony. Your National Space Society delivered both written testimony and in-person testimony to numerous committees on Capitol Hill. We created a voter's guide. After all, 1996 was an election year. We are an organization that's active in terms of informing our elected or to-be elected officials. So we generated a voter's guide. It was distributed by our chapters as well as by headquarters, and it was one of our products on the internet, online. Our online activity became very strong and very significant in 1996. And I'll touch upon that with some numbers in just a little bit. Now let me jump to a discussion real quickly of our chapters. The L5 Society originally, and now the National Space Society, has been very, very strongly based upon and with a great deal of reliance on our chapters. Now in 1996, we counted 95 registered chapters of the National Space Society. But I want to overlay that number with a question and a strong concern on my part and on the part of the board of this and the officers of this organization. Because in the bylaws it states that while 3 members can get together and apply to headquarters to become a chapter and achieve chapter status with that recognition, that for a chapter to remain recognized as a chapter, it must submit an annual report. I mean, that we don't require reams and reams of paper by any way or means. Just a paragraph will do. But even with that minimal requirement, only 35 chapters last year submitted an annual report. Well, to get to the point, I think that any of us that really believe and want to demonstrate an affiliation with an organization and represent themselves locally as a chapter of a national organization should be able at least to write down one paragraph of who they are and what they've done and what they intend to do, even if it says not very much, and submit that but we haven't been able to do that in many cases. There is very strong and sincere concern within the leadership of the National Space Society about the viability of many of our chapters. There are many chapters that we don't have a question about. And I'll talk about those and the organized activities with some national significance that they have pursued. But before I talk about that, let me leap to another very interesting, I think, and I'm highly energized by this achievement during the year. And it wasn't really a direct achievement of this organization, that is, in terms of resources expended, but it is very clearly the continuation of the original vision and dream of the founders of this organization. The IMAX Corporation, in 1996, unveiled and premiered a 3D movie titled L5, First City in Space. Now, I've got to admit I have not seen it just yet, and I know that some of you, many of you in this audience have, and I've heard the reports, and I encourage all of us to not go once or twice, but more times than even your children may be able to stand, because it is an extraordinary piece of work. Visually, it's exciting, it's intriguing, it's energizing. And it presents the theme of large numbers of people successfully and productively living and working in open space. And I think that has to be continually projected as a real vision, a real prospect for the future. Last year, the International Space Development Conference was in New York City. There were regional conferences as well, all organized by chapters. There was a regional conference in Ohio, Texas, Oklahoma, New York, and of course the California Space Development folks met, conferenced, and did their thing. Now there was also the NSS in space last year. Now thinking back 20 years, again just briefly, we weren't in space in any way then as an organization. In fact, in 1977, there were no human beings with U.S. citizenship in space. This was between Apollo-Soyuz and Shuttle. It was a time period that today would really make a lot of us itch real violently. I mean, without space today, I think all of us would go into some shock. But there have been, even after Apollo, there have been years and years in which this country, anyway, has not been in space. And let's hope that that never happens again. Last year, the NSS itself was in space in the form of the National Space Society sponsorship of the Gilbrook North High School students, Gilbrook, Illinois, high school students payload on STS-80 with the equipment provided by Instrument Technology Associates, ITA, of Pennsylvania. In fact, we did. We sent equipment into space, so to speak. We helped students along the educational path with hands-on experience. But more than that, talking about this past year as 12 months back from now, I think many of you saw, I hope many of you saw, and I hope all of you have heard about the HAL 5 Huntsville, Alabama chapter, and their goal of building and launching the first amateur vehicle into space. And as many of you know, the limits of space is still a little arguable. I mean, is it 50 miles as the U.S. Air Force contends, or is it 100 nautical miles, or 100 kilometers, rather, as the International Federation Astronautique contends? Well, either way, HAL 5 intended to get above 60 miles, above 100 kilometers, and in the last month, they have in fact gotten very close. A hybrid rocket of their design and construction with amateur money was launched by a balloon. It was what we call a raccoon, a rocket balloon. It was intended to be carried to 100,000 feet and launched from there to its peak altitude in space. Unfortunately, the balloon, under the stress of the jet stream, at some 60,000 feet, split open, burst. The ground team was watching by television, saw this incident, and after a few very anxious seconds in which 3 commands were sent to ignite the rocket, the first 2 apparently not igniting the rocket, the balloon and gondola with the rocket dropping, and within 1,000 feet of going below 55,000 feet, at which there was a barometric switch that would disable the ignition capability of the rocket. Within a few seconds of that limit, the 3rd command ignited the rocket. It split the balloon further and accelerated to, they guess, Mach 3 or higher, and reached 38 miles in altitude, setting an amateur rocket record. So I am proud, and I believe that we should all be very proud that there's a group, one of our chapters, all our members, who have in fact focused themselves on more than just living in space at some future indeterminate date, but getting there with their own hand-built hardware today. And they're on the cusp of achieving it. And they haven't given up, because before 1997 is out, they intend, and I fully believe, and I've given some money to help them along the way, that they are going to launch the first amateur rocket to exceed 100 kilometers in altitude, and to put not only the National Space Society, but Joan and John Q. Public into space in some real way. Now also this year, the Australian National Space Society, yes, we're international, with a number of international chapters, and probably the strongest in Australia. The Australian National Space Society, holding conferences this last year, pulled together the first summit, Australian summit, of over 6 non-profit pro-space organizations. So public advocacy of space is alive and well down under. Books. Publishing. We have, as members, our members and officers have published a number of books. In 1996, Bob Zuber, Buzz Aldrin, Ben Bova, Fred Ordway, and even one of our former board directors and chapter leaders, Paul Hardison, have all published books, both popular and professional, fact and fiction, on the subject of space and the human expansion into space. And as I mentioned earlier, we're online. We're on the internet. We have a prominent place in America online with what is titled the Space Exploration Online segment, available by keyword space. That page on AOL came into the homes or offices of 60,000 individuals per month over this past year, and the numbers are growing. That's over 10,000 hours of contact with individuals per month over the past several months, and it is growing. In addition, I hope that many of you as chapter leaders and chapter members have participated over the past month and a half, 8 weeks, in the Campaign for the Future. From April 1st until May the 22nd, 3 days ago, the chapters of this organization were challenged in a contest for membership. The objective was 2,001 new members within that 8-week period of time. That would be something on the order of, if you average it out, and everybody did an even job among the chapters, maybe 21 members, new members per chapter. Well, there were prizes, there are prizes, and the first one, the top prize, is a visit by Dr. Buzz Aldrin himself to the chapter. prizes going down the list are no slouch prizes. And you can expect to hear today, I think at the banquet tonight, the accounting and the winners of this contest. So stand by. Also this past year, a member's survey. And this member's survey was interesting. Interesting not only from what it resulted in, the information that came back from it, the opinions of direction and emphasis from our membership, but the fact that 4,000 people responded. That is a good return. 16% of the membership. Yes, some countries don't even get that many people turning out in national elections. The membership survey, just in broad generality, interestingly enough, showed that the moon over Mars is still of the greatest interest as an immediate objective by the membership. The International Space Station received the greatest support in terms of dollars that these members would like to see expended if they had a $100 bill to split up among space initiatives and activities. The greatest share of that among all possibilities would go to finish the space station development and put it in operation. And in terms of what our members, as for the most part citizens of this country, John and Joan Q. Public, felt that in response to the question, how should we best stimulate the public to our direction, to following our direction? Not following our leadership in some generalized way, but specifically thinking more about space, more positively about space. And the response was that the first and most important thing that we need to be talking to our fellow citizens about is how space impacts them directly. How they and space relate to one another in their pocketbook, on their dinner table, in their television, in their entertainment, and in their health care, and on and on. And I think that we all kind of recognize that as being true. One of the things that we can never do too well is hone our messages and certainly deliver our messages on that very point to our fellow citizens, to our family, to our co-workers. That is one thing that we need to continue to do day in and day out and improve at doing every day. The National Space Society has a larger staff now than it has ever had before. The staff is there to do you, the membership's bidding, and they struggle mightily to do that. They're at the call of the chapters, they're at the call of the board members, the executives, the officers, your elected officials, and you as individual members. And they work extremely hard at that. And I want to mention just a few names. There's David Brandt, of course, our acting executive director, and in the office, Libby, Pat, Karen, Cindy, Diana, Rosalie, David, and Rob, our salaried staff. But in addition, this past year, we've had quite a number of as the staff calls them, accolades, and acolytes, accolades to acolytes, who have come in and volunteered their time. Rodney, Bill, George, Jonathan, Glenn, Tim, Michael, Nora, and Lenny, and others who come in virtually every week. One point that I think many of you probably already know about, I think you all know about, is that Lori Garber, our very, very capable executive director for 8 years, this past summer proceeded to take a leave of absence from the National Space Society to go to NASA headquarters at the request of the NASA administrator to become Dan Golden's special assistant for communications and outreach. And I think many of you have heard that just this week, Lori, in a couple of presentations at this ISDC, announced that beginning the day after tomorrow, she will fulfill a new position in Code Z, the Office of Policy and Plans, with the position of Director of Commercialization Plans. So I give Lori and the officers and the board members of this organization give Lori our our very best regards, our best wishes in her continued pursuits at NASA headquarters. And as a friend of the National Space Society, we know for a fact that she has the ears of those who make the policy and the decisions there. And we've got a person on the inside. That is a great thing to have for any movement or direction. Well, let me just finalize my few words about the status of the organization. I'm sure you all like to know where your dollars go. Well, I'm not going to lay out a long list. In fact, you'll see, and I think you have been seeing in the recent Ad Astra, you'll be seeing in the next Ad Astra, some more information and specifics and numbers on where dollars have been going. But let me just give you some information that out of a $1.4 million budget, that's the budget of your National Space Society, much of which goes to supporting national activities, conferences, supporting chapters and regional activities, although most of those are self-generated in terms of funds and support. The organization is also, in its achieving its funding, obtains very little of its funding from industry. And I think that's something that not many of the membership really understand. In fact, only something on the order of 15% of our funds per year come from industry contributions. 15%. The rest are raised from the membership, both from dues and from appeals for special projects and activities during the year. And interestingly enough, as another way to kind of poll the membership in terms of its desires for the organizational direction and activity, these mailings that we send out to you and to many, many others. We buy mailing lists for other organizations, including and publications, including the Planetary Society, American Astronautical Society, but also publications like Omni Magazine, Astronomy Magazine, Discover Magazine. These mailings ask for funds for support and for memberships. And it's interesting to see in the last year that the survey mailing was one of the most successful. I think people like to be able to express their opinion and with the belief that their opinion is going to be listened to, and it is in this organization. Now, the second mailing of last year was on the Mars theme. And interestingly enough, it did not go over very well. It was running something like 25% in terms of monetary return, 25% what is the historical mean for mailings of the numbers that it went out to. Space tourism did very, very well. The desire to go is alive and well, that's for sure. Now let me say something very quickly in closing about where I think we're going. Is it the same old stuff? Are we going to the same old places in the same old ways? Well, I'm from Washington, so the answer is yes and no. There are only so many places near to us in this solar system of ours, and we all know all too well that we have yet to be able to modify gravity and be able to go anywhere we want to at any speed. However, Dr. Ning Lee has provided all of us with the opportunity of some insight at this session into what may very well be a revolution in the brewing. And I want to just, without elaborating any further, tell you that audio tapes are available if you have not, did not have the opportunity to hear her presentation. I think they're, again, at the fear of being a prophet. I think there may be some very interesting times in our near future in ways that we, over the past 20 years and more, have not quite ever seriously expected. But conceptually, on the matter of access to space, CATS, cheap access to space, is a term that we're using more and more often, and it is a focus, because it's only natural, I have to believe, it's only rational to believe that if we're ever going to do a lot out there, that access to there, near or far, has to be not only routine, but inexpensive. And let me say that while there's plenty of discussion about CATS and how CATS is arrived at, that in fact, I believe our organization, with as diverse an interest as it has, Moon, or Mars, or both, in which order? Near Earth orbit, commercialization. We have diverse interests. Those interests will take us far. And we have to continue as an organization to respect diverse interests and to utilize all of them in our messages as appropriate. Most often it's too confusing to tell our colleagues and our fellow citizens that, gosh, what is the National Space Society for? What do you want? Well, we want to go to the moon, and we want to go to Mars, and we want to build a space station, and we want to commercialize everything out there, and oh, by the way, space tourism along the way, and all of that in a fiscally restrained federal budget period. I mean, right away, people are going to turn their backs for the most part. So be calm, be cool. And when you talk to your fellow citizens, respect their lack of knowledge and understanding. Ease them into the future. Take them one small step along the way in that direction. But just continue to work on them. It's not CATS, in my opinion, that we should be talking about incessantly, but it's CHATS. Cheap human access to space. Because with really routine and inexpensive access for human beings comes the real prospect. Our instrumentalities will go before us. They always have. They will take on the riskiest of missions and objectives. And for a long time, it's only going to be our instrumentalities that land on some planetary surfaces or delve deep into some atmospheres. But the human spirit will take us wherever we want to go eventually, in as close to a physical embodiment as we technically can come. Our diversity in direction, our diversity in opinion is a strength, not a weakness. We all need to deliver the messages in a way that says, either explicitly or implicitly, that humans need space. That's the core of the message. That's the essential message that I believe the National Space Society and its membership need to be amplifying and need to be talking about in political circles, in economic circles, in public groups, and in private groups. Overall, I'm hopeful. And I've got to tell you that when I started thinking about what I was going to say in terms of a report on the National Space Society, before I delved into this and really sat down and started writing, I thought, I'm going to have to be negative. I don't think we're really getting anywhere. Well, I want to tell you, I've changed my mind as I've looked with a perspective backwards. While, yes, we have not created settlements in space by the year 1990, in terms of the complexity and the severity of the challenge, space, to move outside of the Earth's gravitational attraction, to move to other worlds, alien worlds, to be self-sustaining. You can't open the window and let the fresh air in when you've got a fire inside. You can't go outside when your canned food runs out and pick a few native herbs or berries or fruits and live off those on the moon, on Mars, or any other world that we found yet. We have to take everything that will sustain us along with us, and it has to be reliable, because for a long time it'll be a long way home. Those are tremendously large challenges, and bigger than probably most of us that started thinking these thoughts in a really adult way 20 years ago or more. But we need to recognize that they are enormous thoughts, and while they're going to take a little longer to achieve than any of us would like, that we will achieve them. Have faith. With your dedication and your help, they will be achieved, not only for you, your children, your grandchildren, but for all of our societies and for all of humankind. The moon is still far away. Mars is even farther today. But our enthusiasm for new beginnings should not be waning. It should be unlimited. The opportunity is certainly unlimited, even though at the moment it still exceeds our grasp. Take a deep breath. Have faith that we will get there, that we will take others there. We'll even get to take ourselves there in 5 or 6 years with short hops into space first, and then tourism follows. Have faith. Remember that we all need to remember that there is no failure except in no longer trying. Thank you very much for your time.
Charlie needs to be at the board meeting here pretty quickly, but he can take a few minutes for some questions. Yes, sir.
Well, I missed it, but I didn't hear you tell us what is the present membership number.
You didn't miss it, Phil. I didn't mention it. The present number is something on the order of 24,000 people.
My second question is, having just invested in the NSS Space Summit, what are your plans in that regard to make it a catalyst for all space organizations?
As Phil refers to a mailing which went out to membership and others, delineating a space summit which the National Space Society wishes to pull together. This is an offspring of, first of all, a request of the White House that Senator Barbara Mikulski made a year ago now, and over her anxiety for the NASA budget and a slide in investment by the nation in civil space programs. And then in the summer, when the President took a few minutes from a helicopter ride to talk about his view of Mars, he added at the end of that, by the way, he was going to call a summit on the subject of space, and particularly the exploration of Mars. Well, neither one of those or that summit ever happened. We, the National Space Society, believe that a summit is in fact required. There needs to be active discussion, there needs to be a focused discussion by not only the public organizations, that is the non-profit advocacy organizations, but with representation and visibility in of our political and our representative governmental organizations. And we intend for that to happen. We are making plans for that. We are working with the Planetary Society, U.S. Space Foundations, the professional societies, AIAA, American Astronautical Society, and others, as well as the leadership on Capitol Hill and with NASA to try to find the right time, essentially to get on everybody's calendar is what it gets down to. And Phil, we don't have a date just yet. It is still intended that we try that it happen before the summer is out. Any other questions? Yes.
Why doesn't the society have more representatives at science fiction and Star Trek conventions? It would seem that would be a natural consistency of the membership.
His question was, why doesn't the National Space Society have more representation at science fiction conventions, Trek conventions, and elsewhere that it would seem like they're a natural constituency for our membership and for our direction? And the answer is that, well, in all honesty, I'm not exactly sure why we don't have more. We have, at the national level, we have relied upon the chapters for the most part to organize participation in national cons, science fiction conventions, and Trek events, and other events organized around other program directions, fictional directions like Babylon 5 and the like. The chapters, that is a chapter activity, quite frankly. At the national level, the board level, we see that, we support that, but not with a lot of funds and not with organizational time from the headquarters level. We ask the chapters to do that, and we quite frankly think, because there are many chapters, there are some chapters, I'll put it that way, that have a large percentage of their membership that are explicitly interested in just those kinds of contexts. Now, and I know that we do have representation irregularly, obviously, at conventions, but we haven't managed to have it pervasively always in every place. And that is something that we at the national level want to encourage the chapters to pursue more aggressively. Right here, Linda.
Just a comment on that. In a sense, there's been a little effort in that direction. Buzz Aldrin at the 30th Star Trek reunion show, he mentioned NSS.
If you didn't hear that, Linda mentioned that there has been some activity at the national level in that regard, and that at the 30th anniversary dinner and convention on the West Coast of the Star Trek anniversary, Buzz Aldrin was not only a speaker, but actively spoke of his participation in the National Space Society and advocacy of this organization and our direction to the televised mansels. John?
Yeah, I can add to that. I'm in charge of science and space programming for the 1997 World Science Fiction Convention in Labor Day in San Antonio. And we're definitely going to have about 18 to 20 astronomy and space panels, 15 other science panels, and there will be a number of people from the NSS and other related space organizations there participating in those panels. And we hope to have a very good program all 5 days of the convention. And there will also be possibly one of our regional Southwest chapters organizational meetings in conjunction with the convention. And the San Antonio chapter plans to have a recruiting table at that convention. And I strongly urge any of you to come. We hope to have a very good track covering all the major issues that are in front of us dealing with space and astronomy and related sciences. So that's, each chapter, and group of chapters, each region of the country, when they see a major convention, it's their duty to go ahead and work with the committee of the convention to try to get a track, science and space track established. That's what we're trying to do.
Well put, John, and lots of good information. Anybody wants any more information, and specifically some key, some ideas on how to conduct, to incorporate yourself into conventions and to organize such, please see John Strickland.
Charlie, can I add something to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a big Star Trek fan, and I just talked with last week with an astronaut who's even a bigger fan than me, and there's going to be a great photo of him dressed up as Spock, hopefully on the PSA website in a couple of weeks, finally. And I've attended a lot of Star Trek cons, and I see some cross-pollination, but I do see, for the most part, that science fiction Star Trek audiences are not interested in the real space program. You can beam them up there, fantastic, but they really don't care. They don't realize what's happening. This is just my personal reaction, but I've seen this in quite a few cases.
Thank you, Phil. Yes, ma'am.
I'm from our Langland chapter, and I carry always petition to open the space frontier. And when you're in a supermarket, library, bank, wherever, and talk to people, ask them to read it, and will they sign them? You keep sending these in, and this is every day, all the time.
Opening the Space Frontier is a letter signing, a petition signing campaign that we've had underway for over a year now. And as she mentions, keep it in your hip pocket, keep it in your coat pocket. We have over 10,000.
Making copies.
Make copies and distribute them. We have at headquarters accumulated over 10,000 of those, and we in fact are distributing copies of them to congressional offices and to the White House, and we keep bombarding them with more that come in as they come in. One more question. Yes, Claire?
You mentioned that you don't put a lot of headquarters time and effort into the science fiction connection. To some extent, mostly it is a chapter responsibility, but there's something HQQ could do that would make it a lot easier, and that's a coordination type of thing. For example, Majel Barrett, who's now on the board, gave a dynamite speech on how to support the space station at a Trek convention a couple of years ago. The ballroom was packed. It was about the size of this one. Everyone was very impressed with what she said about supporting the space station, but she never once mentioned the National Space Society. And that made it very difficult to do little recruiting and stuff like that. If that kind of coordination, letting the people that you know are stars, who you know are on our side, letting them know that there is a chapter in their area, letting them know that coordination would be welcome, that could be done from HQ and it would be very helpful.
That's a fair point, and I accept the criticism, a challenge that we still have yet to really meet satisfactorily to do that in that regard. Let me just say that in Majel's case, that we all know she's an actress, and we didn't have the good fortune to put a script in front of her for that. But even more to the point, her words came from the heart. But she did miss mention of the organization. Mike, thank you all very much for your time again. Michael, thank you.
Charlie, send us a signature too to the boardroom and do good stuff.